On that memorable night of December 25th, 1875, a great, unusual chill ran deep throughout all Mississippi and the entire nation as news spread of Charles Caldwell's shocking assassination. It was unforeseen. The brutal act had left widespread sorrow and disbelief. Caldwell, a prominent figure, had been betrayed by someone he trusted. Buck Cabell, a supposed friend who had lured him out for a Christmas gathering, but it was to his death trap instead, where an assassin hid, waiting for Caldwell outside the window until the aiming was right, and he had shot him in the back of his head. Caldwell, in his pre-mortem moment, had said to the mob that shot him,
"Remember, when you kill me, you killed a gentleman and a brave man. Never say you killed a coward."
After which the mob had riddled him with more bullets to finish him off. This heinous crime had sent shockwaves across the country, leaving many to grapple with the senseless loss of life. Caldwell's life had abruptly ended while in his 40s. Notwithstanding, panic had spread in the terrain as more shots had rang out that same night, and in no time, Caldwell's brother was gunned down too, along with several other black men in the vicinity. Some would die on the spot, while others fell wounded, caught in the wave of the brutal violence unsuspectingly unleashed. This sudden twist of events was not expected at all, because Caldwell hadn't come there to fight. He had simply dropped by to meet with his friend Buck Cabell and share a bottle of liquor during the festive period. Now you might be wondering who this man, Charles Caldwell, was, that his death should have had such a great impact on an entire state, and even the nation at large. Born into the shackles of slavery in the 1830s, Charles Caldwell would rise up against all insurmountable odds to become a behemoth figure in the fight for equal rights. A former slave turned state senator, Caldwell was a man who the system couldn't silence without blood. Forget the stoic generals and the celebrated athletes. The bravest man you've never heard of wasn't draped in glory or wielded a weapon. Caldwell had dared to use his voice, his vote, and his position to empower newly freed black citizens. And for that, the old order wanted him out of the way. In today's video, we delve into the extraordinary life of a singular black man whose courage redefined the meaning of bravery in a society designed to break him. The first black man ever to be accused of killing a white and be acquitted by an all-white jury. Before we get into this story proper, do kindly support our works by hitting the thumb button, share with friends and families to keep spreading our eye-opening black narratives, and subscribe to stay with us for more revealing contents. Without further ado, let us dig in. Charles Caldwell was a born slave who also shared in the anguish of other slaves. He, alongside others, worked in the enormous cotton plantations in harsh weather conditions for a very long period of time. They were subjected to brutal circumstances as they served their masters. They were deprived of their rights, good food, education, and all. Generally, slavery in Mississippi existed in so many forms, beginning from the enslavement of African Americans on small farms, large plantations, in cities and towns, inside homes, out in the fields, and down to industry and transportation. Though slavery had such a wide variety of faces, the underlying concepts were always the same. Slaves were considered properties, and they were properties because they were black. Their status as property was enforced by violence. In the Lower South, the majority of slaves lived and worked on cotton plantations. Most of these plantations had 50 or fewer slaves, although the largest plantations had several hundreds. Cotton was by far the leading cash crop, but slaves also raised rice, corn, sugarcane, and tobacco. Different plantations raised different kinds of crops. Enslaved individuals had to clear new land, dig ditches, cut and haul woods, slaughter livestock, and make repairs to buildings and tools. In many instances, they worked as mechanics, blacksmiths, drivers, carpenters, and in other skilled trades. Black women carried the additional burden of caring for their families by cooking and taking care of the children, as well as spinning, weaving, and sewing. The diets of enslaved people were inadequate or barely adequate to meet the demands of their heavy workload. They lived in crude quarters that left them vulnerable to bad weather and disease. Their clothing and bedding were minimal as well. The heat and humidity of the South created health problems for the slaves that were working in the plantations. Unsanitary conditions, inadequate nutrition, and unrelenting hard labor made slaves highly susceptible to disease. Illnesses were generally not treated adequately, and slaves were often forced to work even when sick. The rice plantations were the most deadly. Black people had to stand in water for hours at a time in the sweltering sun. Malaria was rampant. Child mortality was extremely high on these plantations, generally around 66%. On one rice plantation, it was as high as 90%. One of the worst conditions that enslaved people had to live under was the constant threat of sale. Even if their master was benevolent, slaves knew that a financial loss or another personal crisis could lead them to the auction block. Also, slaves were sometimes sold as a form of punishment. African American women had to endure the threat and the practice of sexual exploitation. There were no safeguards to protect them from being sexually stalked, harassed, or raped, or to be used as long-term concubines by masters and overseers. The abuse was widespread, as the men with authority took advantage of their situation. Even if a woman seemed agreeable to the situation, in reality, she had no choice. Slave men, for their part, were often powerless to protect the women they loved. In addition to the authority practiced on individual plantations, the slaves in Mississippi had to live under a set of laws called the slave codes. These laws ensured that the slaves were considered property and not people, and were treated as such. Slaves could not testify in court against whites, make contracts, leave the plantation without permission, strike a white, even in self-defense, buy and sell goods, own firearms, gather without a white present, possess any anti-slavery literature, or visit the homes of whites or free blacks. The killing of a slave was almost never regarded as murder, and the rape of slave women was treated as a form of trespassing. At all times, patrols were set up to enforce the codes. This brings us to the person of Charles Caldwell. Seeing all these as he grew up, the black audacious man sought various means to seek his freedom and that of the other blacks. In a bid to do this, he started his fight by first learning how to read and write.
He, alongside other philomaths, stood up against all odds to make sure they were able to read and write. Some held underground schools in secret places, often in deep woods, late at night or early in the morning.
Says Heather Andrea, a historian and scholar in African American studies. In her book, Self-Taught, African American Education in Slavery and Freedom, Heather Andrea Williams narrates the ordeals of slaves as they took different risks in order to learn how to read and write, despite the risks it entails.
In slavery, the very act of learning to read had become a secret form of resistance, but in its aftermath, freed people transformed the act of being literate from an act of secrecy to one of life's necessities.
She writes, Williams also tells the story of slaves who received lessons in pit schools, so named as such because they were pits in the ground, way out in the woods away from the master's surveillance. She also writes about slaves who hid spelling books under their hats to be ready whenever they could entreat or bribe a literate person to teach them. It was all shades of risk because when caught, they were either whipped severely or brutally beaten. Others had their fingers or toes chopped off, and some served jail terms. All these didn't stir the ambitious and diligent Caldwell. He was still willing to fight for his rights and that of his people. From a very young age, Caldwell worked as a blacksmith in Clinton, a small town located outside of Jackson-Hines County, Mississippi. Thanks to his skill as a blacksmith, Caldwell started enjoying more autonomy than other plantation slaves. Back then in the 19th century in Mississippi, blacksmiths were highly prized in the plantations because of their efficiency in making and fixing farm implements. Caldwell, on the other hand, delivered his work so perfectly that he commanded considerable respect within his community. Charles Caldwell, being a black, was never meant to have a voice, and Mississippi's white ruling class made sure of this. He was part of Mississippi's silent majority in 1860, the 436,600 enslaved people to 354,000 white people, according to the census, who would be granted full citizenship after the Civil War. Despite these, his outspoken, brave, and daring status allowed him to become involved in politics after the Civil War. He was one of the 16 black Republicans to participate in the Mississippi Constitutional Convention in 1868, which extended the right to vote to all men and created a framework for public education. Shortly after the convention's adjournment, an event involving Caldwell signaled the coming of a new order. Caldwell was shot at on a particular day by the possibly deranged son of a highly respected white judge, and he had dodged the gunshot and shot back at his shooter, killing the young man. He was then tried for murder and acquitted, underscoring the legal rights that Reconstruction granted to freed people. Caldwell supported the radical Republicans in the convention, but the proposed constitution they crafted was rejected in a statewide referendum. When Mississippi eventually adopted a different constitution in December 1869, Caldwell stepped down from his position on the Hinds County Board of Police and was elected as one of 5 black men to the Mississippi Senate. Caldwell would then serve in the Senate for 5 years, and during this time he became known as a radical Republican, voting for both the 14th and 15th Amendments, as well as additional measures to bring racial and gender equality to the state. Despite his progressive stance on racial and gender issues, Caldwell's primary focus during his time in office was resisting a wave of anti-Republican and anti-black violence which spread through Mississippi, as anti-Reconstruction Democrats were determined to reclaim the state legislature. It is estimated that between 1870 and 1875, the Ku Klux Klan and other white supremacist organizations killed several hundred black men and women, as well as some white Republicans. The editorial that appeared in the August 4, 1875, issue of the Hinds County Gazette sounded an ominous note for African-American residents of Clinton and Raymond, 2 towns a few miles west of Jackson, Mississippi.
Scoundrels, white and black, have obtained full control over the deluded and duped and have used them as tools, as the potter uses the clay in his hands, for the robbery of the people, for the exaltation to office of thieves and rascals, and for the disgrace and ruin of the country. There are those who think that the leaders of the Radical Party have carried this system of fraud and falsehood just far enough in Hinds County, and that the time has come when it should be stopped, peaceably if possible, forcibly if necessary. Desperate cases require desperate remedies. We must use remedies equal to the emergency of the case, if we desire to arrest the disease.
The writer, presumably George W. Harper, a prominent local Democrat in Raymond who owned the newspaper, proposed that committees of anti-radical men be formed to show up at Republican events and stop the leaders from presenting falsehoods and deceptions and misrepresentations to black audiences. A month to the day after the editorial appeared, about 2,000 African Americans, along with approximately over 75 to 100 white allies, including a few Democrats from the nearby town of Raymond, attended a Republican political rally and barbecue at Moss Hill, an abandoned plantation outside Clinton. In an effort to keep the political rally peaceful, alcoholic beverages and weapons were banned, and both a Democratic and Republican candidate had been invited to speak.
I suspicion there was going to be some trouble about an hour before the meeting assembled. Every store in Clinton was closed up.
Green Tapley, a local barber, later told a U.S. Senate committee. He ran into a group of people from Raymond and judged from that this was a portion of this committee recommended by the Raymond Gazette. One organizer of the picnic recalled that Charles Caldwell, a freedman and successful blacksmith who had been the local state senator for 5 years then, thought it would be conducive of good feeling to give the opposite party an opportunity to say what they might have to say.
And that we could very well afford to hear them because it would give us an opportunity probably of speaking to Democrats.
Despite the violence, Caldwell was one who believed in the political process and thus would have the Republicans invite the opposition candidate for state senate, a prominent Democratic speaker, to open a major Republican Party rally before the election. Judge Amos R. Johnston, the white Democratic state senate candidate invited, had given the opening speech with no problems from the predominantly black crowd. He opened the event with a speech that lasted about an hour, and who, afterwards, admitted to one of the organizers that he was never listened to more attentively in all the days of his life. But the moment a former Union Army officer, Captain H.T. Fisher, also editor of the Jackson Times, representing Republican Governor Adelbert Ames, began with his speech. A group of 18 white men from Raymond had started out by calling him a liar, making moves to disrupt the rally. Caldwell had tried intervening to keep the peace, but gunfire broke out, and Lewis Hargraves, a freedman, was shot in the forehead and killed instantly.
The thing opened just like lightning, and the shot rained in there, just like rain from heaven.
One witness would later on report. At this point, what seemed to have started out peacefully had quickly deteriorated into some horrible, violent mess that became known as the Clinton race riot. The crowd frantically ran in all directions to get away from the random danger of bullets running in every direction. When the gunfire ended, a total of 5 blacks, including 2 children and 3 whites, had been killed, and as many as 30 others were seriously wounded. Unfounded rumors spread through white communities that a mob of freedmen were amassing for an attack on Clinton. But in reality, more than 500 African American men fled to Jackson to be near the protection of the U.S. Army, while others went into hiding in the surrounding swamps and woods. During the next 2 days, September 5th to 6th, several hundred members of the White Line militia moved unopposed through Hinds County and murdered between 30 and 50 African Americans. Dragging many of them out of their homes and shooting them on the spot. Homes that were empty were looted for valuables. Over the next several days, there would be a bloodbath in the cold streets of Mississippi. This is that cold American history. They won't say never happened, 1875. Governor Ames would anxiously write to President Ulysses S. Grant on September 8th, asking for federal assistance. Edwards Pierrepont, the Attorney General, who was at best indifferent toward the administration's Reconstruction efforts, would ask Ames if the insurrection could simply be put down with state forces. Ames would reply that attempting to use white militia against the white liners would be ineffectual, and organizing a black militia risked a war of races that would spread through the South. Pierrepont forwarded the correspondence to President Grant, along with several dispatches from Mississippi, including a message from the chairman of the Democratic Conservative State Committee claiming that perfect peace prevails throughout the state.
The whole public are tired out with these annual autumnal outbreaks in the South.
Grant responded, admitting his reluctance to get involved, and would advise Pierrepont to suggest to Ames that he strengthen his position by exhausting his own resources before resorting to federal assistance. But, he added, Governor Ames and his advisors can be made perfectly secure. As many of the troops now in Mississippi as he deems necessary may be sent to Jackson Pierrepont. However, selectively quoted from the president's letter in his reply to Ames on September 14th, encouraged him to suppress disorders with the state militia and promised federal intervention only in the event of a rebellion against the state government itself. Ames received Pierrepont's letter shortly before it appeared in various newspapers, which effectively announced to Mississippi residents that the federal government would not interfere. Sarah A. Dickey, a white educator who had just established a college for black women in Clinton, would write angrily to Grant,
"Whoever says to you that our troubles in Mississippi are slight, and that we do not need assistance from the federal government, is an enemy to the colored people and sanctions their slaughter."
She added that she had been at the barbecue earlier that month.
"I saw enough with my own eyes to convince any honest person that the Republicans went there for nothing but peace, profit, and pleasure, and that the Democrats who were on the ground went there for the express purpose of creating a disturbance and of killing as many as they could."
The violence became so intense that Mississippi's Republican governor, Adelbert Ames, began to organize and deploy black militia units, placing Senator Caldwell in charge of 2 companies based in Jackson. Caldwell took a small group of militiamen to deliver arms to another company in Edwards, an act which fanned fears of a race war. Bowing to the anger of white Mississippians, Ames acceded to a peace conference with Democratic leaders on October 13th, at which he agreed to stand down the militia in return for a promise that white line violence would cease. The militia was disbanded, but the attacks on Republicans did not stop, and on November 2nd, the Democrats won control of the state legislature when many African American voters stayed home out of fear. Deprived of any military support, Caldwell still managed to provide a forceful example for other Republicans in Clinton. On Election Day, when some of his Republican colleagues expressed a desire to heed the Democrats' warnings not to vote, Caldwell insisted that surrender was not an option.
No, we are going to stay right here. You must just come right along and keep your mouth shut. I don't care what they say to you. Don't you say a word.
Although Caldwell lost his Senate seat that day, he proved that no amount of Democratic intimidation would shake him from his political resolve. Caldwell's powerful resistance to the Democrats helps explain his assassination a month and a half after the election. On December 25, 1875, Senator Caldwell had gone into town to investigate why his nephew, David Washington, had been taunted and harassed by a group of local white men. Upon his arrival, a white acquaintance, Buck Cabell, invited him to have a Christmas drink with him in the basement of a Clinton grocery. This would be a ploy for the ambush that had followed. Charles Caldwell had been reluctant towards the offer, but Buck Cabell had insisted on the both of them drinking a toast in celebration of Christmas. Caldwell had at last given in, as the gesture would seem harmless and friendly. While the two men stood in the basement of Chilton's store, they touched their glasses, but the clicking sounds had been a signal for the assassins to strike, as the report would uncover later on. Caldwell was shot in the head as he stood with his back to the window. Suffice to say that in that day and age, black politicians were usually shot down in broad open daylight in the county square. But Charles Caldwell was no ordinary politician. He was strong, he was fearless, he was a dead shot, and nobody wanted to meet him face to face. With one last painful effort, Charles Caldwell had pulled himself up and erect, smoothed the wrinkles in his blood-stained coat, and said,
Remember, when you kill me, you kill a gentleman and a brave man. Never say you killed a coward. I want you to always remember it when I am gone.
Caldwell's brother, Sam, who had nothing to do with politics, was killed alongside other black men in the neighborhood. He died after his last request was granted. He was carried out into the street so that all could see that he remained defiant. Caldwell's corpse, and that of his brother, would be carried home by bereaved relatives and friends who had been told about the dastardly event by those who witnessed it. But strangely, the brutal deaths of these black patriots just wasn't enough for these white, hateful fanatics of the day. Some white mobs had been assigned by the order to disturb the peace of Caldwell's home, as though killing him wasn't evil enough already. These mobs had broken into Caldwell's home, where his wife laid his body and that of his brother, and they raised a ruckus, turning the bodies out of the coffins. This was an act beyond devilish, as it was historically insensible. Who could have seen it coming? Still, it only made it more glaring the manner of cowards they truly were. This was the same man they couldn't face while he was alive. They could only do so when he was no longer able to defend himself. Going forward, after much pressure from the public, the grand jury of Hinds County would reluctantly begin to carry out some investigations on the killing of Charles Caldwell and Samuel Caldwell in Clinton. The following summer, a 5-member select committee of the U.S. Senate would be appointed to investigate the events around the Mississippi election. During the hearings, Senator Caldwell's widow would be questioned about the day her husband was killed, and then the testimony given by her would be documented. On the 7th day of February 1876, they would later on issue a public report to the general public, and it read thus:
We have been unable to find the party or parties engaged in this deed. The whole affair is shrouded in mystery, and though nearly every man, white and colored, who lives in or near Clinton has been before the jury, we have no proof sufficient to attach guilt to any man. We have had every witness that could be heard of who was likely to know anything of the affair, but utterly failed to elicit any evidence upon which we could take any action.
In closing, Caldwell's story transcends the dusty halls of history. He wasn't just a politician. Today, he is remembered for his commitment to the fight for equal rights for African Americans. Charles Caldwell may have fallen on Christmas Day in 1875, but his courage never died. He stood firm when it was dangerous to stand. He spoke the truth when silence would have been safer. And in doing so, he became a symbol of resistance, of dignity, and of the unbreakable will of Black America during one of its darkest hours. Though bullets silenced his voice, they could not erase his legacy. Caldwell, as described in a white politician's historical account, was one of the most daring and desperate of his day. Today, his story lives on, not just as a tragic reminder of injustice, but as a call to remember those who paid the ultimate price for freedom, representation, and equality. Now that brings us to the end of yet another interesting video segment. We thank you for coming this far with us. If Caldwell's story moved you, don't let it end here. Like, share, and subscribe as we continue to uncover more histories of our untold heroes of the past. Thank you for watching. See you in our next video.